I'm sorry, but I have to comment this. Petscop censorship and transitioning to when? Well, this is a sequel to my other video, Petscop, Censorship, and Transitioning. I didn't put that in the title because I just didn't feel like it. So if you have 5.5 hours to blow, go watch part 1 and come back here, because trust me, this video isn't going anywhere. It'll be waiting for you patiently. For this video, I want to look at the mysteries we weren't able to solve, some of the weird things that just didn't really make sense initially, and even look at your own theories that you all commented on the video. I was initially, when making the first video, gonna have it be kind of in this almost like Wendigoon's mouthwashing video, where I look at the story like what I did in that video, and then I would start over from part 1, but with the info that we had then. And, you know, oh, we can now say that this is this, but by the 3-hour mark, I realized that was fucking impossible, and that, what do you know, the video became 5.5 hours. So, this video is basically looking at the mysteries, your own theories that you commented on the video, and speaking of the comments, I want to address something. I made a community post about this, but for those of you who didn't see it, I said some pretty transphobic shit in the first video. I didn't realize what I was saying was really shitty, but people rightfully pointed out what I was saying, and it was that I kept saying Care transitioned into Paul because of trauma. Now, there were some comments on the community post that did say there are a few people out there who have transitioned because of that. However, a lot of trans viewers were understandably mad because this whole idea of trauma makes people trans is used a lot by transphobic pieces of shit. Basically, 50-year-old men and women who don't understand why people transition and just refuse to at all try to understand will look at a 16-year-old transitioning, like getting top surgery or something, and will be like, ah, they're mutilating themselves because they were traumatized. Trans kids are victims of grooming. You know, like, just saying really stupid shit. Meanwhile, there's this thing I've been hearing about where men go to get surgery done so they can get their man tits cut off because they're too fat and too lazy to get exercise to get rid of their man tits. That is gender-affirming care, like somebody getting top surgery, but you know, you don't hear anybody saying they're being groomed. So basically, to make a long story short, I said something transphobic, not realizing I said something transphobic. I had mentioned in the video I had thought about transitioning in the past, but I didn't go through with it. I just stuck being a cis guy, and because of that, I don't know the crazy dumb bullshit transphobes come up with. Like this fucking bullshit excuse of trauma is why people transition and thus all trans people are victims or some bullshit. So to all the viewers who pointed that out, thank you, you did the right thing, and to anybody I offended, I deeply apologize. If I didn't make it very apparent in that video, I very much support trans rights, and my whole view of Petscop is that it's a story of someone transitioning, and this trans person witnessing their past. So, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Too long, didn't watch. I'll just put a chapter to skip my yap fest. I said bad thing. I apologize. I will try not to do that again. Anyway, let's go ahead and look at some of the things that we were not able to solve in Petscop and what you guys think it could mean. So, throughout the entirety of Petscop, all the way up until episode 19, which is 5 videos away from the ending, we know the creator of the game to go by the name Rainer Newmaker, but eventually we find out that their name is actually Daniel. and they are the older brother to Michael Hammond. Now, I initially assumed that both the first name and last name, Rainer Newmaker, was just a completely made-up name by Daniel to hide his identity. However, viewers pointed out something very important that I completely missed. In Petscop 13, when Paul captures Ronith, the description states that Ronith is Tonith's baby half-brother. They state how he'll learn from his older brother's mistakes, which is presumably them trying to say that Michael, if he was alive, would learn not to make a game shit-talking your family, and more references to the car crash about him looking both ways. But the detail that I completely forgot to look at was the mention of them being a baby half-brother. Now, we never see or hear Daniel's surname. So what if Daniel's last name was Newmaker, and Michael's last name was Hammond, because they're half-brothers? Basically, Jill, at one point in her life, married a man with the surname Newmaker. She eventually then had Daniel, but then later they possibly divorced. After this, she would then fall into a relationship later in life with somebody with the surname Hammond, and then she would have another child, Michael Hammond. And this somewhat explains the whole surname, Rainer Newmaker. And if that is the case, once again, Daniel, what is wrong with this man? You're telling me that he thought the best way to hide his identity was to just completely change his first name, but keep his surname? Now here I'm just gonna pull a crazy theory out of my ass for a second, but maybe his father's name was Rainer, so Daniel was trying to make it seem like his dad was the one saying all this in the game? But there is literally no evidence for that, so we're just gonna assume Daniel is, like he always is, stupid, changing his first name but doing nothing to his surname. And if this is the case and his surname is Newmaker, that means he literally named where most of the series takes place after himself. Like, bro, you're not doing a good job staying anonymous. However, I am also willing to admit, maybe he didn't care about being anonymous, and so all he really did was change his first name, perhaps just to fuck with the family a little bit more. But even if his surname isn't Newmaker, it would still be pretty easy for them to realize he's the one making the game, because he literally gave the family the game. But with that, we now have a bit more of an idea on possibly who exactly Daniel is and why he chose such a weird nickname. And speaking of Daniel, let's talk about something else. Something else related to him a little bit.
What the fuck?
So, throughout pretty much the entirety of Petscop, we have this character with us nearly the whole journey. They are referred to as Belle by Daniel, but as Tiara by Paul.
The Tiara character is gone now.
And here's the weird thing. At the end of the series, we see that Paul, seemingly, was adopted by Tiara, and that Belle is his friend.
Paul, you there?
The one that he started this channel for. And along with this, in Petscop 12, Daniel mentions that the person playing is named Belle, but they tried to rebirth them into Tiara. So then this leads to the question of who exactly is Belle and Tiara. We know that Tiara is related to the Leskowitz family, presumably another sister of Anna. And we know that Belle is completely unrelated. There is moment after moment after moment stating that she is not related to the family. Whether it be that she has an entirely separate family and she's just friends with Paul, or, here's where the theory part comes in, maybe she was adopted by somebody into the Leskowitz family? A theory that I have heard from people is this theory that Tiara actually adopted Belle. And if this is the case, I think this actually gives us an explanation as to why Belle was a victim of rebirthing from Daniel. From what we can gather about Daniel's brain, if he fucking has one, is that he wants to find out what happened with the Windmill and Care. And so what if, and I'm kind of swinging at air here, what if perhaps Belle, being the adopted daughter of Tiara, is what caused Daniel to decide to go ahead and rebirth her? To rebirth her into Tiara to possibly find out where Lina is? And if that is the case, that makes Marvin and Daniel the same level of fucked, as both of them are abusing children to find out where somebody went missing. However, this leaves the question, why Belle and why Tiara? We know exactly why Marvin tried to rebirth Care into Lina, because Marvin wanted his childhood friend back. That was his goal, and that's why he chose those two people. But the only real connection between Belle and Tiara is that Tiara is presumably their adoptive mother, and that Tiara is the sister of Lina. Actually, one of the two sisters. So why couldn't he just try to rebirth them into Anna? As far as I am able to look up and find out, nobody really knows Daniel's goal behind his rebirth shit. Marvin, at the bare minimum, had a reason for trying to do the sick and twisted shit he did. Daniel doesn't. Now, there was another theory I've heard, and I personally think this is the theory, and it's a little bit less messed up, but also makes sense and fits Daniel's character. A big theory is that Belle was actually the very first victim of Marvin's attempt at rebirth, but they managed to be just fine and escape. And I'm saying she made it out fine because that's the only way the rest of this theory will make sense, unless you really want to believe that they died while playtesting and now have been playing the game for 18 years. Daniel went ahead and made this AI to try to find out why Marvin did what he did. I think that this personally explains everything. Because think about Marvin for a second. It's heavily built up that he is obsessed with getting Lina back. What if to practice rebirth, he tried to make Belle into Tiara? Well, then that wouldn't explain Daniel trying to rebirth them, but this is where I think we could talk about Daniel and get to shit-talk him a bit more. What if Daniel, because he's unwell, decided to go ahead and put Belle into the game, not actually putting real Belle into the game, but the AI, to find out what happened with Marvin and Belle being a victim, and then decided to try to rebirth that AI version into... He then tried to rebirth the AI version of Belle into Tiara. I'm sorry. I just picture, like, Daniel yelling at a fucking... just yelling at the Tiara sprite. Like an angry Twitch streamer. But anyway, Daniel possibly tried to rebirth this AI Belle into Tiara to try to get more info about the family. But if Belle was the first victim, this would explain that scene where the hijack tool mentions that Marvin hurts them. And if this is also the case, I think this really reflects the series' themes of moving on and rebirth or becoming who you want to be to fit really well. Belle and Paul were victims of Marvin, and they both moved on and now are living a life where they're happy and they are who they want to be. And if Tiara did adopt Belle, I do think this could still make it work, but it's a bit weird. We're talking about two mentally ill men here. What am I talking about? Expecting them to do something that makes sense is impossible. One of them programmed their game to talk to robots, and the other kidnapped his daughter. Expecting something logical out of them is just insane. So to try to wrap up what I believe this mystery means, I believe that Belle is possibly the adopted daughter of Tiara. This would fit with the game's themes of adoption. Belle was presumably the first victim of Marvin's attempt at rebirthing, and was able to escape and live a normal life. Perhaps due to it not being in an abandoned school basement, they were either rescued in a few days, managed to escape really easily. I mean, it was Marvin's first attempt at rebirth. He probably did it in a very, very terrible, I was going to say unprofessional, but he did it in a bad way, and Belle got out. Belle would then later in life, or maybe even before all the kidnapping stuff went down, would playtest Petscop, proving to be pretty damn smart. Hence the game and Paul referring to them as smart. Through the AI system of Petscop, this Belle NPC would be created. And because of what happened with the rebirth process, it also brings up that, because Daniel wanted the AI to act just like the people in the real world. Presumably trying to use the AI to find out what happened in the real world. This AI would keep playing and presumably be stuck in the quitter's room for 18 years. Or just be really funny if, like, they just never shut off the PlayStation. Now, why did Belle hang up in Petscop 22? spooky coincidence. Genuinely, spooky coincidence. We can go off the paranormal theory, but if we were to talk about the paranormal theory, that would mess up literally everything we've talked about with Belle. And with this theory, as I've been talking about it, I'm beginning to look at Petscop a lot less like it's a supernatural series. Granted, there are moments where there can't really be a logical explanation, but the creator has stated he doesn't want everything to be solved in this series. So, we can go ahead and just conclude that Belle was a past victim of the rebirth process and was able to go ahead, survive it, and then Daniel would make the weird AI version that we see in the actual series. Here we are. And since we're talking about Tiara and all that, let's talk about Paul. And more or less provide a minor correction on something I did on my part. So, in the original video, I had mentioned the theory that Anna, possibly tired of everything, went ahead and gave up Paul for adoption to Tiara. Tired of the stress, the trauma she's been through, and like I mentioned in the intro, I said some pretty transphobic shit in that last one. I also theorized that Anna possibly didn't want to deal with their daughter questioning transitioning. However, as some viewers pointed out, there has never at all been a single mention of Anna at all being tired of care. As a matter of fact, we get a lot of stuff about her loving care. And so, a theory I heard a commenter leave, which was an incredibly smart theory, I must state. Like, how this slipped my mind, I don't know. But what if Paul was given to Tiara, or at that time it'd be Care, for safety? And along with that, we can explain Paul's surname change. As we saw in Petscop 11, Anna was terrified to leave Care alone, and had to get Daniel to stay over and babysit. So, knowing that her husband is probably still out there by the time Care did finally return home, it made sense that she probably would give them to Tiara. Cause think about it, with Tiara, Care is safe. And then, once they change their surname to Leskowitz, it's gonna make Marvin's life a lot harder to go ahead and find Care. And this would also explain why the letter from Tiara is still so reassuring. Not because of the fact that their mother doesn't love them, but because they can't be with their mother for safety. It's not that Anna hates Paul or hates Care, it's that they're just worried for their safety. This would also explain a little bit about the 2017 conversation. Not necessarily how the fuck it got in there, but would explain why Paul is talking to his mom, presumably. As to why he mistook them for Jill, who knows? Perhaps Paul was going under his own sort of psychosis. There's already plenty of characters in this series who are not okay and going under a lot of psychosis, so, you know, it wouldn't be exactly the weirdest thing to add Paul into there. But I think with this, it helps to make Anna look a lot better as a character and not some shitty mother who just decided, oh, my daughter's battling gender dysphoria, get the fuck out of here. But with a look at Anna like this explains the surname change of Paul, and why Tiara is now their foster parent. Perhaps, going off my theory earlier, oh my fucking god, and going off the theory earlier about Belle being the adopted daughter of Tiara, this explains how Paul possibly met Belle, and maybe explains that conversation at the end. I don't know why they're saying that Lina is waiting for her son, because what? I have to be honest with you, that is like the one segment of the series I truly do not understand. If y'all have theories for that, feel free, I'll fucking heart them. Like I did with all 700 comments, and yes, for those of you wondering, I do read every comment, and I heart it. I hate content creators who will upload a video and talk about how much they love their fan base and want to interact with them, and then will just not read the comment section. Cough cough, every video essayist ever. And with that out of the way, I wanted to move on to something a bit more, let's say, paranormal in the story. The Windmill. The biggest mystery of Petscop and the most important part of the story. It kickstarted Marvin's insanity. It's the reason that Paul was even born. It's the reason that all this stuff went down with the family. It is the biggest point of the plot, but it is so mysterious. We don't even know if Lina actually died, and we don't know what the windmill disappearing really means. The windmill, along with the 2017 conversation, is often the two biggest points of evidence used when pointing out this series being about the paranormal. However, we need to understand something about Daniel. He is very much not okay. In the same breath where he says that he saw the windmill disappear, he also mentions shooting a child. He's also seemingly against Anna's whole understandable hatred for the idea of Care being her sister reborn. So, a lot of people, including me, and many of the commenters theorize what happened with the windmill was not actually paranormal. And here's a way to look at it that is a bit more realistic. Not Wendigoon's whole thing that Marvin knows black magic. Oh my fucking god. So, at Lina's grave, we see the text, "They didn't see her." Now, a lot of people, including me, believe this was a purposeful red herring made by the creator to possibly make us think, wait, was all the references to car accidents actually towards Lina? But here's what I think it means. You see, when Paul is in his shadow form, the way he enters the windmill is through the back. Now tell me, dear viewer, if you were a builder of a windmill, where would you put the door for employees? Probably where people aren't gonna look. And so a popular theory, and what I personally think, is that when it says they didn't see her, they didn't see her go into the employees only door of the windmill, and when she went in there, she was caught by the gears, thus resulting in her death. This death, all because they didn't see her. And this would explain a little bit why her death stuck with Marvin for so long, because if she really did just vanish out of thin air, yeah, that would also stick with you, but, you know, God, I hate Wendigoon's Petscop video. But being presumably a child, and seeing somebody, and I'm sorry for the disgusting imagery, seeing their limbs being bent in ways it should never be, with blood spewing out because they're caught in the gears, would understandably disgust you and traumatize you. Which would also explain why Anna is so against the whole rebirth thing. Imagine having your dead sister be brought up constantly. The memory of her inside of windmill gears, being bent like a pretzel, would understandably continue, which would then understandably lead to grounds for divorce. Now that explains Lina's death. But what about the mention of the two images? One with Marvin and his friend, and the other with no windmill and no friend, taken minutes later. And for this next one, I'm gonna steal this theory from Nexpo, which is probably one of the few good Petscop videos out there in my opinion. Minus the fact he thinks that Care never existed and is a representation of Paul and there was never a Care. He does realize there's a part where we hear Care's voice, right?
And now, and what you look like, see what this is, see what kind of things, see what you look like, now all that you look like.
But Nexpa believes that these two photos are simply a photo taken before Lina got caught in the windmill's gears, and then one taken after, a few minutes later. No windmill, and no Lina. Just a sad Marvin, sad at the fact his friend is dead. But why would Anna take this photo after Lina died? They were presumably like 10. When I was like 8 years old and I went to my great-grandma's funeral, I brought my leapfrog and took photos of my great-grandma in the coffin. My family caught me doing that and forced me to delete the photos though. But you gotta remember, I was 8. If these people were like 8 as well, they have no idea the real seriousness of the situation exactly. By the way, I'm not making up that story. I did when my great-grandma passed away and was like below the age of 10 on my little leapfrog, took photos of her in the coffin. I'm not making up that story, by the way. I was making recordings of dead people before it was cool. Fuck you, Logan Paul. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I got off topic. What about the whole thing about the windmill disappearing? Well, think about this from a PR or town perspective. So imagine you're the governor of a state, you're the owner or mayor of a town, and you have a windmill. And then you hear about a little girl who got caught in the windmill gears and died. I get the feeling a lot of people would not want to go to that windmill. So perhaps for PR, because people just didn't want to go there anymore, or people were audibly disgusted and hateful at the fact the windmill was still up, the windmill was taken down. So when Daniel went to go see the windmill, it vanished, quote unquote. One commenter pointed it out, but perhaps the way that Daniel describes it is like when you leave a town for a long time, like 10 years, and come back and everything's different. It feels like things vanished. And Daniel, being so mentally unwell, is yelling at Marvin, "What did you do to the windmill? Where's the windmill?" Not understanding the concept of construction and demolition. So I think looking at the windmill like this explains it in a non-paranormal way. Marvin and Lina and Anna, all three of them very, very young, below the age of 10, went to go take a photo near a windmill. They took one photo, and within a few minutes, Lina decided to go into an employees-only door of the windmill, and while in there got caught the gears. After possibly not even knowing where she was, maybe after finding her body, Anna, so young she doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, takes another photo. Not looking at the windmill, just Marvin. Marvin alone with no windmill and no friend. Perhaps the next week, years later, who knows, the windmill was then torn down. Daniel, like he says in that video, finds the photos, and when he goes to check out where the windmill was, because it was demolitioned, it's not there. And due to him being so mentally ill, he sees this and blames it on Marvin for somehow making it disappear. This explains everything about the windmill and basically what started the series without the usage of the paranormal. And looking at the characters we see in the game, we can view the series pretty much entirely without any concept of the paranormal at all. Going off everything we see in Petscop 17, it is possible that Daniel was trying to basically train the AI to be like the people in real life, so he could just go ahead and use that to find out what happened, or find out where certain locations were. He then maybe also programmed this AI to speak, and perhaps the way they speak is entirely based on what he thinks of them and how he thinks they act. And, you know, I'm pretty sure this basically explains everything.
I think that was based off of a conversation that I had last year on my birthday.
The birthday conversation that shows up in Petscop 14 has long since its first appearance been a big debate as to what it means and how it got into the game. Up to this point in the series, there had not really been anything concretely paranormal. There was Belle typing those creepy messages, but with the context of the AI, well, maybe it was the AI talking. And with Tiara's in-game character, I mean, at least you can say, oh, well, it's the AI just talking because Daniel programmed it to talk like this. As it seems that AIs were kind of based on what Daniel viewed them as in the real world. But a conversation from 2017? I mean, how do you explain that minus ghosts or merging timelines? Well, after recording the last video, I have come up with a little bit of a theory, and it's a bit of a stretch, but in order to look at the series without the paranormal, I think it makes a little bit of sense if you hold some disbelief. Petscop, as far as we are aware, is a game that takes players' inputs and can mold them into NPCs. And as far as we're aware, what the NPCs say is created by Daniel. Now, we don't necessarily know if the things the AI say are scripted, but I would like to think that they aren't, and they're literally just based on what Daniel thinks of the person. Tiara or Belle is always fighting about who they are and trying to help Paul because, well, in real life, Paul or Care before then and Belle were good friends. Marvin's an asshole who's obsessed with trying to get his goal done in the school basement, kinda like him being obsessed with rebirthing Lina. So what if? And like I said, this theory is a bit of a stretch, but with what we know about the Petscop AI, I think it makes a bit of sense. What if what we're seeing isn't an actual conversation, but like Paul said, a conversation based on what he says? Let me cook, I'm going somewhere with this. We know that Care at some point played Petscop. What if Daniel coded an NPC to act like Care, and what we're seeing is basically that? This would explain why the dialogue from Care's mother is completely unrelated to what Care is saying. And as Paul says, it's based on a conversation. Granted, it was a year ago, so he probably doesn't remember exactly what was yelled in the argument, but still, it was based, not entirely just copy and pasted. So what I'm basically saying is this conversation is AI trying to mimic Care, but it does it so good, it ends up mimicking Paul. Like I said, it's a bit of a stretch, but I think with what we know about Daniel's AI and how he seemed to program it, is it really that far of a stretch? He programmed the NPCs to move exactly like players, to talk. I think he can probably pull off that kind of shit. But what about the discovery pages? Well, you see, dear viewer, this was where I made a severe mistake. I forgot that in Petscop 1, a website is mentioned. The discovery pages are a website. This means this website existed all the way back in 1997. Paul isn't uploading his findings to the website, he's uploading them onto 2 different channels. The one for us, and the other for the family. Or this is the family channel. I don't know. But this explains the discovery pages existing. And it would understandably creep out Paul when he sees what is essentially an AI trying to mimic him, talking about the discovery pages to then find the discovery pages. So the whole birthday conversation and all that, we can explain it in a way that isn't paranormal. What we saw was basically an AI trying to copy Care, but accidentally copying Paul, because Paul was once Care. Which I want to once again, the themes of this series being about a trans person witnessing their past, that is so unbelievably fucked up. To see an AI mimicking your past self, but saying things that you would say right now, and also the copy mimic version of your mother just deadnaming you. Like, that is so many levels of fucked up. Now, as much as I want to say we can look at Petscop without the paranormal, there is one last mystery that's strange. The ghost room, and the length that it appears, pretty much tells us nothing. However, unlike part 1, where I just kind of dismissed this to focus on the themes of child abuse and grooming, I want to go and take a deeper dive at this. In Petscop 17, when pausing, there's a message at one point that says, "The ghost room is a ship in a bottle." From what research I was able to do, I was able to gather that the whole idea of a ship in a bottle is that it is this beautifully, meticulously built ship, but it's been built in a bottle, and you can't get out. So I think that this relates to the ghost room by the fact that the ghost rooms, and the people playing the game, are the ones helping to build the characters and build the AI. The AI and characters and all the things built by people playing is a ship in a bottle. It's complex. They seem very intelligent, this AI, but they're stuck in a PS1. Now what about the whole thing of the person going to the TV and Paul being terrified at Marvin mentioning he's going to, presumably his room? Well, let's think about this for a second. Paul, as far as we can understand, lives with Tiara, and perhaps all of the rooms that we see are maybe meant to represent the bedrooms of the family? Now, granted, I don't know why 8 people in the family own a piano, but I think you could look at it almost like that. Or perhaps something a bit more fucked up and involving the family. What if the family, desperate to have Paul play the game, went into the ghost room and maybe interacted with its settings and possibly rebuilt a ghost room to be like Paul's room? This way they can study and watch what Paul does and make sure that he does not stop playing. Although I don't understand how he would be able to sleep, but I basically think that the ghost rooms are a tool built by Daniel to force people to keep playing the game so the AI can get molded more and more by their inputs. Also, a very fucked up thing I completely missed is that when Paul goes to look at his room in the ghost room images, there is text written by Tiara saying, "Push bed against hidden door." Which, like, that... Petscop is so good with, like, one sentence being able to just scare you. Perhaps Daniel knew that Paul's room has a hidden door, or perhaps that's where in real life his door is. And perhaps Tiara's AI, or Belle's AI, whichever fucking person they are, I don't know. Both of them care about Paul, so it would work for either or. The AI being built off of them cares so much about Paul that it thinks the AI Marvin is going to hurt what is in their mind, the real Paul. So it's telling Paul, "Lock your door! Lock your door!" But it's AI Marvin. He actually can't do anything. I'm not trying to say this to excuse Paul's fear, because trust me, his fear was fucking valid. But I think it just shows how insane the AI that Daniel built is able to go. And also, with this being the tool for Daniel to program the AI and mold it into what it is, that would also explain the very distressing warning saying to contact the police if no one else is available. I think Daniel was so terrified and needed and wanted to mold the AI into what it was that he programmed the game to warn people who are playing, keep playing, I need your inputs. And you know what? I think that's the entire series. I think that's everything explained. I don't think there's anything else I'm missing out.
And now,
when I finished watching Petscop, this part always puzzled me, and I genuinely just didn't understand it and thought I never could. Luckily, you all have left comments explaining what you think this whole ending scene could mean. Some of you theorize that the whole Lina is waiting for her son is kind of meant to point out stuff about Paul transitioning and being reborn, but in a true way, a true rebirth, aka transitioning. And essentially, via this whole transitioning process, Lina's ghost, or Lina herself, if she's still alive, I'll get into that later, may kind of view Paul like a son. Some of you think that Paul is called Lina's son because of the fact that Lina is who he was trying to be rebirthed into. But instead, he became somebody else, and due to this, is considered Lina's son. Or another theory is that Lina never died, and perhaps because Lina is alive, she looks at Paul kind of like a son. Because the whole point of Marvin's rebirth was to make Paul into Lina. But they came out as Paul. Kind of in a weird way, almost being like the son of Lina. And while this may not explain exactly why they're referring to them as son, I think it at least gives us a good explanation. And with that theory of Lina being alive, let's just re-look at the series for a second. What if the gravestone about Lina wasn't really about Lina dying, but the day that Lina kind of abandoned or left Marvin as a friend? Perhaps Lina moved on to other places. Maybe custody issues going on with Anna's family caused her to move away. But to Marvin, at a young age, she may as well have died. And so, this just makes Marvin's character even worse. He then tried to rebirth Care into his childhood friend, to relive the past. He did not see them as their own person, but as a tool to bend and mold into Lina. Just like how Daniel likes to bend and mold controller inputs into AI. I love when the themes of two characters connect, holy shit! And perhaps this whole thing about Lina just references that Lina's alive. And what if Tiara isn't Paul's mother, but Lina? Let me explain. One commenter pointed out that the New Life letter may not exactly be from Tiara talking to Paul, but instead a letter to Belle, who perhaps, similar to Paul, transitioned into Tiara. Now this begs the question, why would they have the surname Leskowitz? Well, this leads me down to two possible paths. Perhaps they were adopted in life by somebody from the Leskowitz family, possibly Lina. Or, and this would be a more fucked up look at it, what if all the mentions of Belle not being in the family is the family not accepting them because they're trans? To them, they are not part of the family. I'm adding this current recording in post, so I can't lie to you, this little bit right here does throw a bit of a gear into the cogs of this theory, but I think you could look at it in a way that kind of works around it. Anyway, I'm gonna let past me speak, and like he just didn't acknowledge the fact that there's the surname Leskowitz right fucking there. I mean, for God's sake, in the locker is 2 eggs. If you know anything about LGBTQ slang, that is just like in your face. So what if perhaps Belle and Tiara, similar to say Care and Paul, are literally the same person because of transitioning? This also makes them being friends feel a lot more wholesome because of the fact that they are both trans and probably have tried to support each other during hard times because for some reason people don't like the existence of transgender people, I guess. I have already gotten comments on my video saying the trans slur and saying that this series has nothing to do with people being trans and them also assuming I'm trans. So I can tell that they didn't watch the fucking video. I literally said I am cisgender in that video and currently still am. What? And instead of Paul going to Tiara, they went to Lina because Lina is still alive. Or what if I'm wrong still, and Paul still lives with Anna, and Anna just accepts Paul for who they are? Looking at the series like this, I'd argue is the closest thing to a happy ending we can get. Paul presumably can live with his mother, who is accepting of the fact that he's trans, or living with Lina because of safety concerns about Marvin. Maybe the surname change wasn't exactly for safety, but simply just because of the divorce. A lot of comments pointed out that I overlooked the fact that Paul probably just changed his last name because of the divorce. You see, without saying my last name, because I don't really feel like getting doxxed, I did not change my last name when my mother and father divorced, so I just assumed all kids who had divorced parents did that. Sometimes I forget to do research on the small things, and turns out those small things are not that small. But in my opinion, viewing Petscop like this is probably the closest thing to a happy ending I think this series could have. And since we're talking about Paul and being trans, I wanted to go ahead and talk about why did Paul, or Care, if we're going to talk about dead names, why did they transition? And instead of me talking about it, because, like I said earlier, I clearly don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, I'm gonna go ahead and look at your guys' comments and just some little bit of research I've done.
Very strong resemblance between us.
So, a very common response I heard from people, and from what I could also do research on online, possibly the reason that Care transitioned into Paul was simply they wanted to transition all the way back when they were a kid. You see, this is probably the most heated part of trans rights, but multiple people who have transitioned, I need to preface this because people seem to forget this, people who have transitioned and are trans have stated that their gender dysphoria, they felt at like age 5. And there are multiple other people who have transitioned who have all pretty much repeated the same thing, that they felt their first ever case of gender dysphoria and wanting to be the opposite gender back when they were before the age of 10. And so what if Care is simply one of those people who, at a young age, knew that they didn't want to be a girl? And along with this, some comments have pointed out a theory that makes the whole thing with Marvin trying to rebirth Care about 500 times more fucked up. What if Care had talked about not feeling like a girl at a young age? And Marvin took this, along with her not having eyebrows, and said, "Oh, so you don't know who you are," and then tried to rebirth her into Lina because of their gender dysphoria, which is, like, so ungodly fucked. Which just, like, once again, Marvin is such a piece of shit. All he does is groom people, I swear to God. And perhaps Care was able to just fight through the rebirth process that Marvin was trying to do, and still came out wanting to be a man. And thus, later in life, would transition into Paul. What if Belle, about my whole theory about them being trans, also went through this exact same mindset? That they were forced by Marvin to try to become somebody they're not, or even Daniel, and were able to come out on top as a better person. A part of me thinks that symbolically, that's why we see Belle's character always trying to help Paul, because what if Belle, being Marvin's first victim, helped Paul recover from the trauma that he experienced being a second victim? The two of them were able to get past their trauma and to be who they want to be and not what Marvin thinks they are. Which I have to say, that, if that is the case, is the biggest allegory for transphobia, like, ever. Having someone wanting you to not be who you want to be, having someone force you try to be something that you are not, that you know you are not, is just like, oh my god, why do people miss the trans themes? They're right fucking there. And even if Belle, my whole thing about Belle being trans is wrong, and Belle is truly just a random person, and Tiara's taking care of Paul, I still think this theme is still strong. And something I want to point out that another comment mentioned that I think really kind of highlights and makes what I said in the video look even worse. Something that can be looked at as really beautiful in Petscop is, what if the thing about Paul experiencing trauma isn't necessarily a whole story of this caused him to become trans, but the fact he was still trans and decided to transition after that trauma. Being told, a little girl who thinks that they are actually a boy, that you are instead this girl, you are this girl, you are not a man, you are not Care, you are Lina. And to be able to come out of that trauma and still decide that I want to be a man no matter what Marvin told me is just like, oh my god, man, I fucking love Petscop! But ultimately, in my opinion, I think the reason that Paul transitioned is like the reason any other person transitioned, because they felt happier doing so. And perhaps Marvin, seeing this, took advantage of it to try to go ahead and take a child who is questioning themselves on if they want to be a boy or a girl and try to mold them into another girl. Perhaps Daniel did the same thing with Belle or Tiara. But what is truly important is that Paul came out of it as Paul. And that, to me, is the most wholesome and the best part of the story. To see the trauma that somebody has been through. The trauma of trying to be told that you are not who you think you are. To have a game mention your dead name over and over and over. To have an AI mimic you and those AIs dead naming you. That, to me, will be 5,000 times more horrific and gut-wrenching than any bullshit about merging timelines. And you know what? With all this info we've got and all these theories we've made, why don't we try to rebuild the timeline? So let's go ahead and start from scratch and see what we can put together. In 1968, Lina Leskowitz was born. In 1977, Marvin, Lina, and Lina's sister Anna would take a picture in front of a windmill. Anna took one photo with Lina and Marvin in front of the windmill, and then a second one, minutes later, with just Marvin. There was no windmill and no Lina. Lina did not die. Perhaps this was the last time that Marvin saw Lina. Some people in the comments theorized maybe he said something to her so horrific that it made 9-year-old Lina just never want to be Marvin's friend. Some commenters even theorized that Marvin's abusive tendencies started here, and that is what led to their friendship ending. And also, according to Daniel, Marvin was so distraught and mentally ill, he put up missing girl signs, but instead saying birthday girl, presumably about Lina. And for a good chunk of time, we do not hear anything about Marvin or Anna. In 1988, Michael Hammond was born. Michael Hammond was the younger half-brother to Daniel. The date of Daniel's birth and Jill marrying two different people is not relevant to the story. Sometime in the 1990s, Marvin would go ahead and marry Anna. And to Anna, this probably seemed like a genuine marriage, but it was really so Marvin could try to rebirth his friend back, to relive his past. And also at some point in the 90s, Daniel had started work on the game Petscop. Either he was an employee for Lina, or it was almost like his own company to basically just publish his own game. In 1992, Carrie Mark was born. In 1995, Michael would die. He was 7 years old at his death. With the multiple references to car crashes and cars when looking at Michael, it is heavily assumed that he was ran over. And judging by the fact that 1 year later, Daniel would mutate the game into what it is for Marvin, it's assumed that it was Marvin who ran over Michael. Whether it was on purpose, an accident, we do not know. But knowing Marvin, I get the feeling that he probably hit the gas. In 1996, Daniel would start to mutate the game into what it is as we see in the series. In 1997, the issues between Anna and Marvin's relationship was starting to get too big to handle. Whether due to his constant mentioning of wanting to rebirth her sister, whether it was just general abuse, the relationship would end in divorce and split custody. At first, Marvin would get care every other day. And then, probably after finding out that he was being pretty abusive to Care, the custody was then changed to just the weekends. My personal headcanon for the reason that custody was shortened for Marvin was perhaps Marvin heard about Care's gender dysphoria and was taking advantage of it. And so Anna, hearing that her daughter is being groomed, would take away Marvin's custody. Then on June 5th, with Daniel babysitting Care, Care would go missing as Marvin breaks into the house and kidnaps her. A few days later, Daniel would write that note that we see in Petscop 1. And then, even later into June, Daniel would go missing. Presumably the whole time he was missing, he was just working on Petscop and its AI system. On July 10th, we see that Daniel had went ahead and set up a demo for Marvin to play. In my original video, I accidentally said that Marvin was playing on July 10th. Instead, it was that this was written on July 10th, and Marvin could have been playing this whenever. But it should be noted that on this, we see lots of info from Daniel that mentions the things that Marvin has done, which just could perhaps mean that the text box we see there was written on July 10th, but the caskets, as they're dubbed, were added after Care had returned home. On November 10th, Daniel, possibly finding enough clues, maybe even using the game's AI system to replicate Marvin, was able to find out or put together that Care is in the school basement. The school itself, as described by Daniel, is abandoned and run down. He goes into the school basement to try to find Care, and it's so dark that he has to presumably use a flashlight to see. He does find Care, but when he goes out to reach for her, she runs away. Then from November 10th to the 12th, Care would run all the way back to her home, presumably on her birthday. And then later that year, in December, Daniel would give the family Petscop for the first time. Also, by the time he had given them Petscop, it was the first time he had shown his face to the family since June. In 1999, Paul would presumably hang out with Belle physically for the last time, and with a lot of the family for the last time.
And I'm trying to think, when was the last time I saw any of you at all? It had to have been, like, 1999. I was a kid. I was a small kid. Tiny kid.
Sometime in the 2000s, the AI of Belle, or Tiara as Paul sometimes says, was presumably turned on. And I have to assume that the AI runs, or the counter that we see in the text runs when the PlayStation is off, because I doubt that PlayStation was on for 18 years. I also get the feeling that Paul may have started transitioning by this time, and if not by the early 2000s, then at least somewhere near the first episode's release. In June of 2000, Daniel would go missing again, and once again reappear in December, giving the family Petscop again. And from what we can gather, he also killed himself that same day. In 2004, Paul's mother would then have custody of the game.
After 2004, my mom had it reportedly.
Then later in 2017, Paul would find Petscop. Paul would then go ahead and upload these videos for Belle to see. Belle, being a playtester, was probably baffled at the mention of Petscop. And all was well until Petscop 7, where seemingly before or during that video's production, the family took note of what Paul was doing and started to censor certain things, but also kept him playing. I get the feeling the main person making Paul play was Jill, judging by his mentions of her being scary and trapping him, and also just the fact that this game talks about her dead kids. She probably wants to find out what Daniel's final thoughts were. Paul plays, and eventually goes ahead, and finally beats the game. That, to me, is Petscop. A beautiful story about trauma, child abuse, and being who you want to be. No mention of merging timelines, no mention of anything relating to time or Care and Paul being lost twins at birth. Like, Wendigoon, what were you smoking? And I want to go ahead and explain myself here, because a lot of people are not happy at how much I shit on the multi-timeline theory. However, I will accept criticism where it's due. I did shit on the view of the series very harshly. So I want to explain why I'm so harsh and so against this whole idea of Petscop being about merging timelines.
Paul, Anna and Marvin's child from the other timeline, begins converging with Care. Care starts seeing the world as Paul, sometimes seeing things that will happen in the future.
But I certainly think that Paul and Care are twins. That explains their connections, that explains their links. And if Paul has a connection to his character, if he's getting his left and rights mixed up because there's some deep draw between himself and the version of him in the game, then that explains why Care has problems with it as well, as mentioned by the counselor in the school.
Care was born as Paul, and Carrie Mark was merely a hallucination of Marvin's mind.
What? 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 What?
One reason I am so gravitated and in love with stories about trauma and the past is stories of a character moving on past a giant struggle. You know, this image, I know it's used as a meme, but I can often view stories of people trying to move on from their past to be like this. Because with stories about trauma and the past, You can bend them and mold them into whatever way you want and still tell that story. You can make a video game about your character going through exposure therapy, a horror game about a man being sent a letter from his late wife, and when he goes to the town that the letter says to go to, learns that he's a lot more involved in her death than he thought. A story of somebody who cannot get over their trauma and causes trauma onto someone else. A story of a woman learning to let go of their dead lover. Can be molded and bent into interesting genres and stories. And so to take all of that and say, well, you see, actually it's about merging timelines, and in this other timeline, they lived all happily ever after, completely just guts the throat of any importance that the story of trauma had. And that is exactly how I feel about Petscop. To look at everything Care has been through, the abuse, the trauma, the toxic family she's had to live with, and to simply say, well, in this other timeline, she's Paul, and she's happy, and what's that about eggs being representations of people not wanting to come out as trans? No, no. It is doing nothing but gutting and taking away any impact that the story of abuse had. And I'd like to rephrase myself when I said in my first part of this series that the creators ignore the topics. That was a bit of an exaggeration, if I have to be so blunt with you. But what I do feel like they do when they talk about merging timelines is soften the themes. And let me explain. Imagine being Care, okay? You're questioning your identity and who you are before you're the age of 10. You have a father who is constantly trying to presumably tell your mother that you are not you. Eventually, this leads to divorce, and divorce has its own effects on children. Perhaps Care, hearing their name be brought up along with Lina, could have assumed that even at that age, it was their fault for the divorce. That is something that children often go through when it comes to divorce, is feeling like they are the reason. And then suddenly, one day, your father comes in, kidnaps you, and for nearly 6 months, you are stuck in a school basement with him, being stabbed, poked, being forced to play piano music over and over, being asked, do you remember being born, being told you are not you, and you're already questioning who you are. And then you escape. You're home, and life is fine now. But in this other timeline, do you see what I mean by it softens the impact? Imagine telling somebody who's been through traumatic events, well, in this other timeline, you were happy, you're fine. And yes, I am aware, Care is a digital character. I know some of you have probably been yelling that at your screen. However, what Care went through is real things people go through. In my personal opinion, I always view characters who go through traumatic events and very, very horrible things that happen in the real world to essentially be a walking allegory. An example, in my opinion, could be Anya from Mouthwashing, a literal walking allegory of the sexual assault and sexism that women have to deal with in the workforce. Yes, Anya is a fake character from a video game, but the shit that she goes through happens to real people. And so, to take these real themes that happen to real people, and to just ignore them and brush them to the side, which a lot of these creators do, unwillingly or willingly, well, to be blunt, it pisses me off. Instead of going deeper into the themes of the dark subjects because they need their precious little paycheck, they just ignore it and try to soften it with things like merging timelines. I think as a content creator, if you are going to cover something dark, either say it with your chest out or don't say it at all. If you're going to make a video about a series that involves child abuse, do not be afraid to say child abuse and mention the themes of child abuse. If you really want to make a living off YouTube, have a Patreon. Have somewhere people can donate to you. But next up, I want to go ahead and kind of hold my ground when it comes to my belief about why I think this series involves trans themes, and why how do I put this without sounding like a big accusation? Actually, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna say it. I get the feeling a lot of them don't point out or try to discuss the possibility of Paul being trans at all, and instead hyper-focus on this overly paranormal merging timeline shit, because they're worried if they mention the word trans, they're gonna lose money. Because for some reason, the world keeps thinking that trans people are some big, evil fucking species or some shit, when they are, and I'm gonna blow your mind here, they're normal fucking people. And in my opinion, Petscop can be viewed with Paul being trans without the series necessarily being an allegory for trans trauma or trans issues. We could simply just accept the fact Paul is trans. That's it. The story is just about moving on from the past. And would you look at that? It still is a story about child abuse and about the horrid things that Care went through, but we didn't have to come up with this random bullcrap that it's about merging timelines. But I personally think viewing Petscop as a series without trans symbolism or imagery to represent transitioning to be a lot more of a boring look at the story. Because to add the themes of transitioning makes the story so much more interesting and have so much more depth. And I also feel it just helps to fit with the themes of moving on from the past in a way that could be looked in a way of a trans person, to move on from who you used to be to who you should be. Much like how Paul and his friend both were able to move on from the trauma that was given to them by Marvin. And before we finally end this video with some of my final thoughts, I just want to say a thank you to the comments on part 1. Many of you pointed out things that my brain somehow did not notice. And once again, thank you all for pointing out my pretty blatant transphobia, even though I didn't intend it. But I think that Paul being trans makes the story so much more interesting and have so much more depth. And I don't think that content creators should be afraid to mention this theory or mention this concept. Because, much like every trans person out there, Paul is just a normal person with his adorable cat.
Hey, cat, what are you doing?
And he was able to find his way home.